Welcome to the Avance Podcast. I'm Dan.
And I'm Nick.
And our guest today is Stephen Smith, and his Porsche shirt is inspiring my Carter Automotive Group tip of the week.
Okay.
And turns out Carter is a personal friend of his, so thank you, Wade.
Hi, Wade.
Hi, Wade.
Yeah, Wade rocks.
Yes, we agree. He does. He has great taste in cars, too. So there's a little fun story. This is just a real quick, this is less of a tip than it is just a funny story about Porsche. Did you ever wonder why the Porsche 911 was named the 911?
Because there was a number thing. Like somebody owned a number that they wanted, didn't they?
Silly
so back
French.
at the time, silly French, they farted in their general direction.
Yeah.
And it was, exactly. So Peugeot had the right to the 901. It was actually not, Porsche was going to call it the 901. And Peugeot threw up a stink because apparently it was the placement. The number one in the center of three letters was
owned by Porsche.
Sort of owned by Peugeot.
No. Peugeot owned the 0 as the middle digit.
That's what it was, yes. Yeah. And so Porsche was like, fine, we'll just put in a 1.
So did they drop that? Because you have cars like the Z06. I mean, that seems like that would be an infraction on Peugeot. Maybe they just need to stick to making bicycles.
3 letters.
Three digits. 0 as
digits.
Oh, it has 3 digits. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So if anybody asks you, like why we laugh about like trying to pick your 911 model because there's like how many 911s are there? There's probably like 60 variations of the 911. But anyway, if you wanted to know,
this, dot that.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
So that's how the 911 came about.
I like it.
Yeah,
works.
So cool. Anyway, that's a quick Carter Automotive Group tip or fun fact of the week, we should say. But
now you know.
Now you know. Yes.
Yeah.
Stephen Smith, welcome to the show. It has been quite the chore to get you here today. This has been our worst starting of any episode we've had in probably 200 episodes.
So we blame Adam?
We blame Adam.
We blame Adam.
Yeah, that's Adam's fault.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah, he wanted us to be a better podcast and have video and be professional. Yeah. 2 out of those 3 are happening.
But thank you for your patience, especially, and your contributions.
Oh, good fun. So,
Stephen, give us a little bit of background on what you do. I know you have a love of cars and things like that, but you're kind of a designer by heart, correct?
Yeah, my degree was in what's called industrial design. Most people understand it as product design because if you say industrial design, they think you're an HVAC guy who does duct work in a building. And it's like, no, I designed the.
And there's an art to that.
That's a
there's
thing too.
True. I'm not putting it down. I'm just saying that they misunderstand what you are, and it's like I designed stuff, the stuff that you use every day, things, objects. Other famous product designers, industrial designers, Raymond Loewy, Ferdinand Porsche. We design stuff.
I love how understated you are in all this conversation right now. I'm laughing in my head. I'm like, stuff. You're like literally the grandfather of the dad shoe.
Yeah,
for one.
That's what they labeled me. Which
is pretty cool, actually.
Well, I always laugh because, the people who see me now, they call me the godfather of dad shoes, blah, 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 blah. And it's like... Is
that something you want to be called? I guess we could have started there.
No, it's fine. In the end, it turned out to be actually it's a pretty cool moniker to have. But when they first did this article, it was when... sneakers and dad shoes in particular were becoming very popular. And, I thought they were slagging me off. Like, dad shoes? What the? I'm Yeezys.
Compliment. Yeah.
And so, the thing they always forget is they see this guy, the late 50s designer. But, people don't understand that, like, that guy, that's who designed all the New Balance shoes. The dad.
Oh, you've got to send us this photo. I have to post this photo as, like, the icon for the show.
Like a Mad Max / like 80s sunglasses? Is that what you had on there?
Yeah, kind of. They're just the bar. I lost them somewhere around Rutgers University at a concert, at a bar room.
It's a very precise. You know exactly where you.
I know exactly where they were. I was driving my brother's '78 International Scout, and they fell out somewhere on the sidewalk, and I lost him. I was pissed.
Somebody.
Because I had him
I remember,
for years.
Was it in the early 80s, like Pizza Hut, you could get those. There was some movie promotion.
It was
they had a bunch
Back
of
to the Future 2 promotion.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, okay, I mean, what made you want to go do that, go to school to design that? Were you always out there saying, I think I can make products better? I mean,
yeah, growing up, I was the youngest of four, and my brother, the oldest, he and his friends would smash all my toys and my stuff. And so I had to figure out how to fix them if I could. So I started to learn how things were put together. And, at the time you're pissed, like, shitheads are wrecking all my toys, Mom. But if they never wrecked all my toys, I'd never been curious enough to figure out how they were made to see if I could fix them or put them back together. And
you hear that, David? That goes out to my brother, because I did that to him a lot. He brought it up several times.
So, and then
I'm an only child. I had to break my own toys. Both of you just screw off. So,
having fights with yourself.
In the mirror.
Still does.
And then my grandfather was, he wanted to be a surgeon, but his family were very poor. And so he went to go off and become a detail finish carpenter. So it was very surgical, like precision work. And then he taught me a lot of precision hand skills and making things and woodworking, and I like to make things. So kind of that was the origin of it. And then I loved machines, power tools, cars, motorcycles, guns, anything. Growing up, I had dirt bikes, and you
just bonded with Dan instantaneously.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to see how they, I wanted to fix them myself, and pre dirt bikes, I had BMX bikes, and I became the kid in the neighborhood everybody came to get their bikes fixed. Like, oh, go see Steven. He's got all the tools and he can fix just about anything. So I was fixing everybody's bikes, and then it evolved into things with motors on it and fixing my dad's lawnmower and so I was fascinated with machinery and stuff, and I wanted to go be an automotive designer. And then growing up in Massachusetts, you really didn't understand that there were only two places you go to become a car designer: Art Center in Pasadena or Center for Creative Studies in Detroit. And those were the only two schools that they hired people from to design automotive. And I didn't even know they existed. I went to my high school guidance counselor and was like, hey, I want to do this thing called product design. And he's like, oh, engineering. I said, I don't know. Is that what it's called? So
sure.
He signed me up to apply to Boston University's School of Engineering, which at the time was kind of difficult to get in. So I was kind of shocked I got accepted, because it was like, and then I looked into it. I'm like, wait a minute, this is math and shit. I like to draw. And build things.
Excuse me, I don't think I'm in the right room.
Yeah, it was kind of like that. And so I went and talked to my art teacher, and she's like, no, what you want is called, industrial design. There's RISD and Mass Art in Boston that teach that. And I'm like, oh, thank God, thank you for saving me. I thought I was going to sit there and do math and formulas and all the things.
I almost got the wrong degree.
I almost failed out of engineering school because it wasn't really what I was wanting to do. And so anyway, I went to Mass College of Art, and it was a very small program. And they taught us to design stuff. And where they geared your curriculum towards was medical devices, early computer companies, Wang, Digital Data General, to companies that were located around there, and that was the Massachusetts Miracle at the time, with all of the early days of computers and high tech and MIT. And so I learned how to design interesting laboratory equipment and consumer products, but simultaneously I also, I always laugh. Anyone's old enough to remember Married with Children with Al Bundy. And it's like, I ran high school track. And, then I went to art school where there were no sports. So I still ran, late in the middle of the night. I would go for 10-mile runs at like 2 a.m. by myself. And so I ran, and I wore New Balances. And so when I graduated from school, I heard New Balance was looking for one of the first actual full-time designers they were going to hire. And I'm like, people design sneakers? That'd be kind of interesting. It's transportation. It's not a car, but it'd be kind of interesting, and I could design something that I myself could use. And it was almost goes back to those like busted toys trying to fix it. I could run in the running shoes and then figure out how to make them better. Because I was always driven, not just new and different, but new and better. I always wanted to make it better. And so I went there and interviewed, and it was Reagan era Wall Street, everybody wearing ties and button-down suits and Brooks Brothers, and I went there, and it was in a ratty old mill, and we were in T-shirts and jeans, and I'm like, yeah, I like this place. This is my kind of thing,
Your people, yeah,
yeah.
And so I interviewed, and they're like, all right, it's 11:30, interview's over, we're all going running. And I'm like, what? They're like, everybody goes running at lunch. And I'm like, where do I sign,
Yeah.
And they're like,
can I borrow a pair of shoes?
Hold on. Yeah. I haven't hired you yet. I'm like, okay, cool. So it was really far from my parents' house, because I lived at home. It was like a 70-mile one-way commute to go there. And they called me and offered me the job the next day. And I was like, I'm doing it, But I had a hella commute. Spent so much time in my car going back and forth every day, but it was worth it. It was my entry into this. And at the time, New Balance was very small. And Kevin Brown, who was the first full-time designer they ever hired, he was only there a year before me. And he liked court sports. So he did primarily tennis and basketball and women's fitness. And I ended up doing a lot of the running shoes and some basketball, and then some weird European orienteering and fell running and soccer shoes. So yeah, it's in those early days where I did all of those big New Balance shoes as this young kid right out of school, and so they went on to become these iconic product. And I never sat down, I was a 21-year-old kid. I'm going to design this sneaker that's going to be around forever and be celebrated as this, breakthrough, blah, blah, blah. It's like, all right, what's next? Let me design that's now. All right, we'll do this 997 next. That's a good one. Oh, have 1500. Oh, that'll be a good one. And so you just kind of worked on the next one, and you're like, you were driven, okay, when I do the next one, there's things and compromises that were done and made. I can make it better in the next one. And so that, again, drove how I work and how my brain works and how I process these projects. And so in the end, I ended up doing all of these shoes that New Balance today sells more of than they did when they were new, like 996, 997, 1500, 574, 676, 677. The numbers just boggle the mind. And as of late, their latest retro style they dropped is this 550 basketball shoe that I designed, and it's now considered in the market to be overtaking the Air Force One this year in relevance. And I'm like, wow, But again, it was that goofy 21-year-old kid, not the dad that I am now. But
do you think that
go ahead.
If you didn't have the experience in running, obviously they taught you in design school. Did they teach you about how to actually because you weren't just, when we think of somebody that designs a shoe, sometimes we think of it aesthetically. You don't think of the comfort levels and things like that, and how it supports you and things.
Yeah, types of rubber materials.
Mechanics.
That's the word.
To me, and this is what people forget. These kids forget. 38 years ago, this wasn't a career. It didn't exist. Some of us who did it in those early days, we defined what this is as a job and a career. Like, it was done by pattern makers or shoemakers and cobblers in the past. It wasn't really done by designers. It was new for us to get involved in this aspect of it. So what we did define that as a career, which is kind of cool because all these kids want to do it now because it looks cool and because we made it look cool, because it would, otherwise you'd be like, shoot me now, I'm drawing another frickin' sneaker. But the challenge was to make it more interesting and better each time. And it turned out that that was the right mentality and the mindset. And some guys I worked with there at New Balance later left and went to Reebok, and they wanted to start up this whole new advanced concepts innovation team at Reebok that didn't exist before. And the guy I worked with at New Balance was like, I know the perfect designer for this. And that then they recruited me, and I went back home to Massachusetts and worked at Reebok as their advanced design director. And the way I approach these things, again, it's different than other people who would look at it as, oh, you're a stylist and you move lines around. And it's like, I looked at it as it was a machine. It was a machine for running, a machine for sport, because I loved machines and mechanisms. And how can I make it a better performing machine? And how can I make athletes perform better through what I create? And that kind of became one of my specialties, was building better stuff as opposed to just new and different. It was new and better. And so that also drove the aesthetic, and the things that I was interested in my personal life then influenced exactly what I worked on. So, I've got a 356. I love Porsches, and just the Porsche mindset was very similar to mine, with incremental, always improving, but incremental improvements. You don't reinvent the Porsche. You see it immediately from the first 356 prototype, from Porsche number 1 to the ones you can go buy today. You see it, you immediately know what it is from what they've defined through performance that then has defined the aesthetic of what is a Porsche.
Yeah, they live up to the hype.
Yeah, you see it and you immediately know, brand-wise, that's a Porsche. And
yeah, I was going to ask you about the Reebok. It wasn't the pump itself that you invented. It was the Fury. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, and again, if you look at the Furies, the Fury was
laceless.
Looks like it's missing something in the middle there.
Yeah, it's funny. That's the one thing people zoom in on, but it wasn't. I didn't design it to be laceless. I designed it to be a pump system, if that makes sense. It just by default. You didn't need laces anymore, so we took them out. But
the air bladders would hold your feet in, correct?
Yeah, and these...
Yeah.
The thing that's interesting about this particular product is, at the time we were doing it, everybody went to the same old shoe factories, and everybody made their shoes there. So you'd go to the factory in Korea, and there'd be one side of the building that was making Nikes, and then the middle side that was kind of obscured a little bit. They were making Reeboks, and then down the hall was the guys making Adidas, and it was all the same factory making the stuff. But everybody's proprietary ideas. But you could go snoop around and do some espionage and figure out like what Nike's got coming out next.
Sneaker espionage, yes, okay.
Well, I mean, only so many people have the tooling at the time, right?
Yeah,
to create the shoes the way.
And so the thing that this was such a breakthrough for that people don't even realize is, first of all, it's a machine. I built a very Bauhaus Germanic-like machine for running. There's not a piece on this that you can take off and the shoe will still work. We had gone outside the footwear factories, and this was kind of a first. We went to aerospace companies, Formula One factories. The pump system was actually made at a place that made life vests and medical cuffs and things like that.
That makes sense.
Not shoes.
I remember him in the basketball shoes more than
Oh
anything.
yeah, the first one was Pump 1. I got there just as Pump 1 was about getting ready to launch. I did some troubleshooting on the system. Again, because of my background of this idea of improving and making better, they were running into some issues. So I was able to work on building that thing better, which, again, what drives me. But the thing with the Pump 1, right, is we made a basketball shoe, and then we stuffed that thing inside of it. Whereas this thing, we're like, why are we pulling this pump and then building a shoe around it? Why don't we make it the shoe? So we kind of took it away and stuck it onto a midsole, and were like, that's the vision, of this thing. And so basically, again, we went outside the shoe factories to make this thing. The carbon fiber piece, the guys I worked with on the carbon fiber piece, those were guys who worked in the Skunk Works, who worked on the SR-71s. It was really cool hanging with these guys, we made the SR-71. I'm like, oh yeah, I make running shoes.
Those guys have some crazy stories.
Oh my God, it was so cool to work with those guys. And they're like, now what are we making? And like this kind of potato chip thing, And when we first went to one of the other aerospace companies, these guys made planes, fighter planes, F-15s, F-16s, and they're like, we want you to make this piece, and they're like, come on, dudes, we make whole planes. We're not going to make this Pringles chip for you. And like, well, how many planes do you make? And they're like, 30. And like, well, what if you made 300,000 of these or 3 million of these? You're making the same part. Think of economies of scale and profitability. And like, we're good with our government contracts, right? So we went to these other guys, and again, they worked on SR-71s. They made helicopter blades with Sikorsky, and they're like, yeah, we'll take a shot at it. We'll make that for you. And so within 6 months of us working on this thing, the military-industrial complex had imploded. And all of a sudden, these guys making their 30 planes a year were knocking on our door like, oh, we'll make that potato chip for you now. We're like, yeah. Sorry.
How many potato chips would you like, sir?
Found someone else. Sucks to be you. You had your chance to take the risk with us, and they didn't. And then the other company that ended up making these for us, we pulled them out of bankruptcy. They were teetering on bankruptcy, and we saved the company, which was really cool. But we didn't know they were running lean, but we saved the company. And then the other guys who made these, this was made in Western Massachusetts. These were made in Kemmerer, California. The Hexalite, which is the cushioning piece that's in the heel here, that's a honeycomb structure.
Yep, I remember that well.
That was made in California. And so
what year did these come out of curiosity?
94 it was launched.
94, okay.
I started sketching.
Just going into high school. I was trying to figure it out. Yeah.
Yep.
I started sketching it in late 91. But it took us that long to figure out how to get it all to work. Because, you make an assumption of what this shape should be to hold your foot, and it inflates, and then it doesn't really hold it where you need it to. So there was lots of tweaking and fine-tuning and adjusting. And it was also the first one we used with the Instaflate, which was a CO2 inflator to instantly inflate the thing rather than... And you still had the onboard pump, but the inflator was really cool because it was just like, psh, and the thing fit you. And so that came from, we went to Interbike, which was the big bicycle trade show, and we saw these guys who had this thing called Superflate, so you could fix up your mountain bike on the trail. And we're like...
I remember those.
Yeah, I had those for my dirt bike.
Yeah,
yep.
And
Back
so
for enduro,
we worked with those guys to build our own special version for this, which was really cool. And we were pretty a point of the spear on cutting edge on what was going on right then, because it was a big battle between us and Nike. Once the original Pump basketball shoe launched, we passed Nike briefly as number one, which people forget. But then we kind of, we went astray and lost our way corporately, not our particular group. And the other thing that this model represented was a very Bauhaus way of thinking of parts reduction, because they were like, with the pump and the carbon fiber, like you're using all these expensive components, things going to cost a fortune. And so when you look at a traditional sneaker, there's around 100 components to make it up, with all reinforcers and the laces and things to protect around the laces and to stop the material for pulling and other things. And basically what we did if you look at this thing and you push down the tongue piece, and the pump system is essentially the shoe. Even you push this down, it's the bladder is the shoe, and the rest of it is just there as comfort features. And we reduced it down to like 25 components from about 100 components. So now, by that reduction of actual components, you could trade apples for apples on the cost of it. So you're now buying 1/4 of the material for the same price, but now you can upgrade all the materials that you use. So it came out as a traditionally priced sneaker with all of these crazy, high-tech industrial materials. So it was really cool, and then it really scared people, which I knew I was onto something. When the design scares people, it's right. And
yeah.
So when it came,
boy, is that going to play out later? Is that foreshadowing?
Yeah. And so then it came out, and ended up in the London Design Museum for alternative weird materials. It's in the Smithsonian. It just became this groundbreaking design, and so I was like, all right, I did my job.
Check. Yeah.
And then you did it well enough that you were stolen away by Nike after that, right?
Well, actually, I left Reebok because it was getting stupid, and I went
corporate issues.
I went to Fila. And
that's right.
Fila is who moved me out here to the West Coast. And then Fila was imploding, and they wanted us to move to Italy, which everybody goes, oh, that would be so romantic and great to move to Italy. Not really in Milan, Torino area where they were, because all of a sudden you've now relocated and the company's still not doing well and you are out of a job in Italy, as opposed to being a job here where, the majority of the companies are based. And so I strung out Fila as long as I could until I could get into Nike. And then I ended up at Nike, and I was there for 10.5 years. Where I did all kinds of crazy running stuff and technologies and air units and track spikes and,
Is that what brought you to the Portland area?
Yeah, Fila brought me to Portland because they had a small office.
Okay.
They were based all over the place. They were based in Italy. They had an office in Baltimore. They had an office in New York City, and then they had an office in Massachusetts. So I actually started at the office in Massachusetts, and then they opened a small one here in Portland to try and steal Nike people away.
I was going to say there had to be some strategery there.
Yeah, so they stole a bunch of Nike people, and then the Nike people were like, you think more like us rather than New York City fashion people. That's affiliated with Fila through the apparel side. Why don't you come out here and work on our team with us? And so that's how I moved out here. And I stayed. But Nike...
It's a nice area.
I'm going to grab a cough drop. But
yeah, no problem. We know you're recovering.
Nike was fun for a while. It had its moments. I did some pretty wild product there. I had some great successes, but like a lot of places, I don't tolerate fools. I don't tolerate politics. I'm hired a designer. I wasn't elected as a politician. And, whether you like me or not, I don't really care.
That's a difficult balance in Portland, just saying, or Seattle.
Yeah, but, even in the corporate environment,
Yeah, I know. It crosses over a lot, though, just due to the area demographics. There's so much diversity here.
Yeah, and
in politics.
Too many people are busy all day climbing the ladder and sucking up, and I was busy making cool shit. And that's all I cared about. I would have worked at Nike forever in the same old job. I so many other people were just motivated to climb the ladder, make more money, do this and do that. Like, I'm happy designing cool shit, and that's all I want to do. And they're like, don't you want to go to the next rung, and don't you want to be a director? I'm like, no.
No.
I want to do
I
what
love
I'm
what
doing.
I do. Yeah.
Why you hired
I want to
me.
make enough money to drive cool cars, and you know. Yeah.
And I want to do what you hired me to do, which was design cool shit. You didn't you didn't hire me to sit in a meeting room and listen to everybody else talk about how smart they are and how great they are and how they should be elevated to this position or that position. You're wasting my time and your money. I could be designing really good stuff.
Yeah.
And so, in the end, it blindsided me because they're like, well, you haven't moved up in a few years. And I'm like, I don't want to. I'm like, well, that's a problem, And, well, maybe nobody wants...
That you didn't want to move up? You just wanted to do what they paid you to do?
Exactly. That was a problem.
Okay. Oh. You didn't want to pay the plate...
I've seen that play out like that before, which is disappointing because there's a lot of people who really love that. Like, especially I think people in crafts, woodworking, mechanics, things like they were engineers where they love building something. They don't want to go manage a bunch of engineers. They liked being that contributor and working with their hands and seeing that product that they made. Like, and
a lot of the people that rose up to those positions were spent burnout designers, and I wasn't done. They were content to be that.
Clearly not.
Ooh, yeah, God, the pressure's not on to design the next great thing. And I'm like, well, why are you a designer then? Get the hell out.
Did you have an opportunity while at Nike? I know a lot of times, you see, where Jordan's in there designing with his shoes, and I'm not talking about meeting the athletes, but where somebody comes in and goes, "This is what I want on my signature shoe," and you're going, "But that's not going to work." Like that, aesthetically great, but it's not going to be comfortable, kind of thing.
Most of the runners, I mean, they had egos when it came to running and that, but when it came to product, they were kind of clear on what they wanted, but humble in that they knew that you were the expert in what you were creating for them.
Okay.
And then
that's nice to hear.
The ones that I design, Paula Radcliffe breaks the women's world record in half marathon and marathon, and it's just like, Steven kind of knows what he's doing. I'll listen to him.
Exactly.
And Sean Crawford, and I've got one of the spikes I did that he ended up wearing and getting the gold medal in the Olympics in sprint, and I'm like, he's like, I'll wear anything, man. And I'm like, I don't want to fuck up your Olympics, dude. He goes, I'll wear it.
You will blame me.
For 4 years. 4 years, I fuck up your career. No. And
no, thank you.
He's like, I'll try it. I'm like, okay, if you're willing to accept it, you try it. And dude wears it and wins the gold medal. And I'm like, 4 more years to...
Unpucker effect.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the transition to Adidas and then the pretty life-changing events that have come from that. I mean, you've had a lot of life-changing events, but this is another one I think what most of our younger listeners are going to be more familiar with.
Yeah, so I got fired from Nike after 10 and a half years.
Because you didn't want to go manage somebody.
Right.
I mean, God, where's your aspirations, sir?
And,
that's funny.
Yeah.
The guy I work with now, Ye, loves to tell people that. Can you believe they fired him? I'm like, yeah, they did, yeah. So it's good fun.
We don't need to say it over and over again.
Yeah. They did, dumbasses. But
there it is.
I love that you can say it.
Spam call. See ya.
Yeah, it's all good.
So then I left.
Spam call. I meant Kanye.
And I went to. So then I went to Adidas. My two of the friends I worked with at Fila actually left Fila and went and started the innovation group at Adidas. And so they were like, anytime you need it, we're here for you. And so 10 and a half years later, I was like, hey,
excuse me.
Yeah.
And they're like, come on over. Yeah. So there I went and I did apparel and electronics design, which was kind of cool because it brings me all the way back to the tech that I was actually trained to design in college. So I did all of these real-time monitoring devices for athletes tied into soft circuitry embedded and woven electronics into the garments that did real-time biomonitoring of
cool
the soccer players for FIFA and MLS. So it was really cool. So I got to build all these electronic devices and transmitter units and computer housings and antennas, and then actually apparel. So it was kind of fun. It was a whole different learning curve. And then after a couple of years, Adidas had a hiring freeze in Germany, but they decided they wanted 2 electrical engineers, so they stole my headcount to Germany without me. And I'm like, so what does that mean for my job? And they're like,
where am I supposed to go?
Yeah. You're supposed to find one inside somewhere. Good luck. And
okay.
I was like, that's not cool. So
like, I liked this before.
Yeah, so I left there, and then I went to Keene. And just before I started at Keene, I did a 2-month stint at North Face doing their, I was lead for running for North Face, and they really didn't know what they wanted to do. So I after 2 months, I was like, yeah, this isn't it. And in the meantime, Keene had been talking to me, and I went there as innovation director. So they wanted to make things in the U.S., and I'm like, cool, you're speaking my language, I love that. They had a small factory here in Portland on Swan Island where they just injected shoes. They didn't actually do the full manufacturing. And I'm like, okay, here's an opportunity. I will grow this manufacturing to be true 100% made in U.S. And so that became my goal there. And I was there for 2.5 years. And the owner, he's still a good friend. He's a Volkswagen guy. He was actually in college. He was a Porsche and Volkswagen mechanic at John Mozart's dealership. If you know Mozart down in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
So yeah, he worked there. But he and I had a disagreement on what innovation was, and I walked out of a meeting and quit. And I went home, and my wife's like, how was work?
Stop quitting things.
I was like, well, yeah.
Funny story.
Funny story. I quit.
I'll be home tomorrow and the day after.
And she was like, what are you going to do? You got a family and all that. I said, honestly, I don't know. I said, but I can't do that because that's not what I signed up for. And oddly enough, the owner and I are still good friends. One year he rebuilt my transmission and my racing Beetle for me for a Christmas present, which was nice of him.
Yeah, we got to talk about that soon.
And so I really didn't know what I was going to do. I was kind of like in a dark, unknown spot. I'm like, what? The first week went by. Oh, it's great. I don't have to do that. And the second week came, and I'm like, uh-oh. I do need a job. And it was funny because New Balance and Reebok both had gotten word that I was on the loose, and they had both early on conversation of like, would you come back as the face of history and the design that you've done for us? And I said, yeah. I said, I'll come back. I don't want to be just a figurehead. I want to design stuff still. That's what keeps me interested and excited. And I'm not, I would say I'm not done yet. And
everybody wanted to move you up the ladder except you.
I know.
It's funny.
Yeah, it is funny.
And I feel like as honest as you've been with us, you probably were as honest with them. It's like, this is what I want to do. Don't give me a job where I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
And when I first got to Nike, they had a role of advanced doer. There were dual paths. You could go into management or be an advanced doer, and you were in the same pay grades and things. You know what I mean? It was a dual path, and then this went away. And it only became this. And I'm like, well, I'll just stay doing this because this is what I like. But it wasn't acceptable.
Yeah.
And so one night, on a Monday night, I was home, like, I should get my portfolio together. And the phone rang. And I looked over, and it was a weird New York number. And I'm like, I normally don't answer out-of-state calls, but I'll pick it up. For some reason, I felt I should pick it up, and I picked it up, and it was Ye. And
just random call from Kanye West.
Yeah.
Yay, but Kanye West.
I'm like, hello? He's like, Mr. Smith? I was like, yeah. And he's like, hi, it's Kanye West. And I'm like, why are you calling me?
Of all the wrong numbers.
And he was like, I know the products that you've done. I'd love it if you would come design with me. And I was like, oh, how interesting. I was wondering what I was going to do. And so we talked, and we just vibed and connected. And I'm like, this could actually be really interesting and cool. He just wants me to design stuff, and I just want to design stuff, and it was like the perfect
yeah, that worked out real
pairing.
well.
And for the first year, I couldn't talk about what I was doing, where I was going. I would mysteriously just leave town. The only ones who knew what I was doing was obviously Ye, and my mom, and my wife, and my brother. And that was it. Those are the only people who knew what I was doing for a job.
Did you know of him? I mean, did you understand where he came from and his history and things like that when he called you, or was this something like meeting somebody and learning their whole life and then being able to really provide for them? And
yeah, it's kind of like I knew of him. I knew.
Yeah.
I knew he could be.
It was hard not to, but I mean, there are people on there.
It could be controversial.
Sure.
And he interested me, from the phone calls. Sure. I'm like, this man is fascinating. And so the more I hung out with him, I realized like he's pretty amazing. And he was like, this guy can design stuff for me like nobody else has. And so it was this match made in heaven. And I always told him, I said, dude, you saved me from a dark place. You were the hand of God that reached into the dark and pulled me to the light, and allowed me to do what I love. And in one of his songs, one of the lyrics is, I know I'm not going to fail because I've met Kanye West. And I truly believe there's a magic to him, and I'm eternally grateful to him for sharing that magic with me and empowering me and kind of unleashing me from the corporate world and the corporate structure and the corporate constraints. Like, all of a sudden, you were free to think with him.
Well, sounds like he listened to you when you said, I want to design things. And he went, good. I want you to design things.
Yeah, pretty much. Let's do it together. Yeah. And
sure.
It's been an amazing time. It's the best time of my career. It's like being a kid out of college again, where you can just dream and build it.
Sure.
And, you have the resources and the connections to build just about anything you can dream of. And we dream of the things together, which I think is more important, because he had these visions of things that he wanted to do and build, and the corporate world got in his way, enabling him to do these things where he's like, why can't I do this? You're one of the biggest companies in the world. Why can't we do it? And when I showed up, I was like, let's do it. Let's try it. And he's like, what?
Yeah.
Nobody ever says that. And I'm like, well, if you don't take the risk, you've already failed. So I will not fail. I will not fail you. We'll do this. We'll try it. And he was like, very Yoda-like, there is no try. And it's like, well, we do have to try. We attempt, and then we succeed. That's the difference. Other people try and give up and fail. And like I said, my mother used to call the boys the thick mix, for the Irish, the Boston Irish, stubborn bastards. And, because my dad's side was Irish, and but if it wasn't for that stubbornness and the thick mick, as my mother would call us, I wasn't driven to do these things that others can't. I'm like, why would I want to do things other people can? That's no fun. Anybody can do it. I want to do the shit people can't. That's the challenge. I'm going to design stuff other people told me couldn't be done. You can't do that. I'm like, and for good or bad, I've been the hold my beer guy in this industry. It's like, tell me it can't be done. Oh yeah, get the fuck out of my way. I'm going to do it. Watch. Get out of the way. And, too many other times, too many other people are in the way. They're scared. They're scared. You can't do that. Like if we were to say we were going to take a shoe and have no laces and have carbon fiber piece that we took a third of the weight out of the midsole, people are like, you can't take that arch away. We're like, why not? We're replacing it with this bridge out of carbon fiber from aerospace. Well, it's scary. I'm like, fuck yeah. You should be afraid of it. And so, yeah, that's been kind of the story of my career. Again, good for good or bad, because, sometimes you piss people off above you that they can't do it or they're envious of it. Even down to working with Ye directly, it's like some people are envious of that. They need hierarchy. They need somebody in the middle. And it's like, it's me and him. What do you like? I like that. Let's make it. Simple. Clean, simple, clear. You've got the mission. Let's go. And other people need to complicate it to have their fingerprint on it. Like, well, what if we went over here and did that? It's like, no, we're going from here to there. I'm like, well, if we went over here and maybe if we tried to, I'm like, no. We're going from point A to point B. And I am going to do that, whether you like it or
the shoes are a perfect representation of his image, in my opinion, too. Like, you look at that shoe, and I'm like, yeah, that makes sense, and I love that. Like, you can see that connection there. I mean, one thing I've learned from working with a lot of celebrities over the years is you don't know anything about celebrities until you meet them, and even then, you know what they want you to know.
Yeah.
So I hold any reservations. But I love that, like, I don't know, I love that polarizing effect of a shoe like that. It definitely, when I see it, I'm like, yeah, that Kanye, that goes right along.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's fun. I'm with... the compliment to what I do, the risk taker, the disruptor. Nike, they all talked about, let's disruptive design is what we're about. And then I'd give it to them, and they're like, we really didn't mean it. That's kind of disruptive.
Too different. Too disruptive.
Too disruptive. Yeah. And I'm like, what are you talking about,
I want to talk a little bit about your cars, and I want to know
about that bug.
I have several questions. I want to know about the bug, and I want to know if you, being the designer that you are, has ever taken anything you owned automotive and gone, I can design that better, and done it to your vehicle, kind of thing. Good one.
I mean, I think aesthetically, if you look at my 356 and together, I like collaboration. I like to work with the experts and what they are, and I've been fortunate enough up here to work alongside Rod Emery and his dad Gary at Emery Motorsports and building the Outlaws.
Very cool.
And we took a street 356 and we tweaked and twisted it and built part of Gary's vision into it and part of my vision and part of Rod's vision, and out of it came this pretty unique special 356. And that's what Emery's are great for. Rod and his dad have this amazing designer's eye for what they craft. Because other people build Outlaws, but I mean, it's similar where you look at an Emery Outlaw and you know who built that car. There's a I don't want to say there's a perfection, but there's everything's right about it. No matter where you look at it from. And other people build Outlaws and you look at it like they put one too many details in it, or they didn't get to this part and it looks unfinished and unresolved. I mean, you look at Emery's designs, they're resolved. And that's how I look at my products and the sneakers. They're resolved. You turn it around, you look at it from every angle, it looks good, it looks right. And part of that goes back to those early days at New Balance, working with these pattern makers and these shoemakers. There was an excellence that you created. I mean, you think about it, excellence was expected. It's almost like a Porsche mantra. And it's how I looked at the design of it. So there's a synergy between, me owning a Porsche and associating with the Emerys as well, and learning from them. And they have a designer's eye. They're not trained designers, but you look at it and they've created a masterpiece, a thing of beauty. And that's what we try to do with the Yeezy product too. It's an individual art piece. It's accessible art, and that's kind of what Rod does too. They're pretty expensive for access to them, but it's an art piece that you can use. That's why I loved my 356. It was a piece of art that I could drive, and same with the Racing Beetle.
I wanted to ask you all about that. So the Racing Beetle is a road race.
Yeah, it's a very special, unique car. And people are like, it's just a bug. You made a bug into a race car. I'm like, no, I didn't. The original owner made it into a Racing Beetle the day he bought it in 1965. And somehow it managed to survive. Because, people looked at him as a it was an entry level car, and
commuter car.
Yeah, but Bill was very Bill Gilbert, the original owner and builder of that car, was very clever in what he did. He was strategic. He was an engineer, and he looked in C sedan, and there was nobody in C sedan, so he got a C sedan. He got a Beetle. And part of racing that in SCCA in the Northwest, when you're the only C sedan, you get first place every time, no matter where. If you finish,
you have no competition.
Because they put all the sedans out together, and E modified, and B sedan, C sedan, A sedan. Well, the A sedans weren't because they were big cars, but he raced with Mustangs and Corvettes and all kinds of crazy ass shit. I've seen photos like, what the fuck was he doing in there with them?
Straight up Herbie.
Oh, totally. Yeah. But when he was in a group of all of these other cars and mixed class, you could come in dead last, but if you were the only C sedan, you got first place. And so he ended up with all of these first place and points and trophies, and eventually he got the car dialed and it handled really well, and he was legitimately winning C sedans, unless somebody came with like a Ringer or a super fast Mini with the bigger motor in it and stuff. He would get second or third place or first place even. So he had the car pretty developed. And then, so it was pretty well known in the Northwest. It raced up in Seattle, at Kent. It raced in all the way up at Westwood in BC in Canada. He raced, south into Salem and Corvallis down here, and PAR, which then was Delta Park. Same with Pacific Raceways. It was over in Kent.
SIR.
Yeah, it was SIR. Yeah. Many changed names a few times. He raced at Shelton. Pretty amazing race history this car had, that this guy raced this thing in. And it's kind of fun when you show up at the tracks here in the Northwest and you get some old guys who are like, holy crap, this can't be. Is this the same car that I saw racing at like the Rose Cup in 1968? And you're like,
keeps going.
It is.
Yep. That's awesome.
This is the car. And they're like, that's incredible. I remember being a kid watching this car race, And so it was cool to get it back out. But what happened with Bill is, the 1970 comes along. They changed the racing regulations and rules. And now all of a sudden you could have aerodynamics and you could modify the car and have disc brakes. And he was a family guy. He couldn't afford to keep up with these guys. And so there was a local racer, Win Casey, and Win got a Beetle that was a IRS Beetle, and then he had the body acid dipped, put on MP fiberglass bodywork, had an 1835 with Weber 48 IDAs, aero. He added aero kits to it and stuff, and Bill's like, I'm out. I can't compete with this. And so,
yeah, I have to feed my children.
So 1970 Rose Cup was its last period race, and he towed it behind a Volvo 122 Amazon wagon, and he towed it home with the tow bar, pushed it into his barn, flipped up the tow bar, The magnetic towing lights were still on it. He took his suit and his helmet and sat it in the passenger seat, jacked the thing up, put it on wooden blocks, and drained the fluids. So it sat like that from 1970 until 1996. Gary Emery saw it in the back of Hot VW's magazine. Road Racing Beetle, $3,000 Corvallis. And so Gary was like, what the hell is that? I got to go see this thing. It's not far from us in McMinnville. And so he went there, and that's the way it was, just like Bill last raced it. And so Gary ended up buying it from him and taking it out to Emery's farm in McMinnville, and they took it all apart. Classic Gary. He took it all apart and then kind of lost interest in it for a while, and it got spread out. If you've ever been out to their place, they have 3 or 4 barns on their property, and the Beetle was in every one of them in various pieces. And so I bought my 356 when I moved to Oregon, because I grew up on the Rust Belt and the East Coast, where you couldn't own cool cars because you just watch them rust away. My dad was happy because he got a new car every 2 years before the floors would rot out from the salt damage. And so I moved out to Oregon. I'm like, there's no salt here. There's lots of old cars. Sweet, I'm getting an old car. So I got a 58 356 Super Coupe, and that was my daily car. And so I bought this thing.
Wow.
And I was cool. Like, all right, I got this thing. I need to figure out, A, where to get worked on, and B, where the hell am I going to get parts from the 50s for this thing? And I looked in the back of the 356 newsletter, and there was this guy, parts obsolete for Porsche out in McMinnville. And I'm like, oh, he's in Oregon. I'll drive out there. And I drove out, and I met Gary for the first time. And Gary was like, that's a pretty little A coupe you got there. And I'm like, yeah, it's not bad. And he goes, got B seats in it, and I'm like, oh, okay. I said, you got parts for this thing? And I was like, yeah, follow me. And if you've ever been out there, but he had this massive, 7,000 square foot barn just filled floor to ceiling with everything part you can imagine, bodywork, every nut, bolt, screw. And because he was the parts manager for Chick Iverson for years, he's like, what do you need? And I'd be like, I don't know, this screw here, 616, 35, 46, 43, 4, it's over here in this drawer.
Rain Man situation?
Because he ran the parts department, so he knew everything. So
all the part
I was like, well, I love Gary. He's really cool. This he'll be a good friend. And so they had Cameron Healy's old number 8 speedster race car. He used to race. And they had a couple, Ted Rogers, number 19, 356 C race car. And I'm like, what are these? They look like race cars. They're like, yeah, we race. I'm like, oh, cool. And he's like, you ought to take your coupe out there and turn it into a race car. I said, that coupe's how I get to work every day, right, at this point in time. And he's like, well, you could sell the bumpers off it and get a race motor and put a cage in it and still drive it to work every day. Just race it on the weekend. I said, yeah, but if I wreck it...
You'll get to work faster.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm like, well, if I wreck it on Sunday, I don't go to work on Monday. So no. And in the back was the Beetle in pieces. And I was like, what about that Volkswagen? I said, that's a pretty sweet looking thing. I said, it's got roundels on the side for numbers. I said, is that thing a race car? And Gary was like, yeah. And he goes, that's a special one. And he goes, that's one of the most documented vintage race cars in the Pacific Northwest. And I'm like, really? I said, well, then it should be mine, right? And if you want me to come racing. And he's like, well, too bad it's not for sale. And I'm like...
Just held that bait out in front of you and then pulled it back. Yeah.
And I said, well, I'm not going racing with you. And I said, no, wait a minute. You said I could sell my bumpers and buy a race motor and a cage? how much are my bumpers worth?
Yeah, let's go back here. Yeah.
Yeah. He's like, well, those were 6-month only, 1 year U.S. bumpers. And he goes, they're probably worth about $12,000. I said, interesting. I only paid $13 for the car. So, and
$12,000 in bumpers.
And I said, well, now I'm paranoid that someone's going to hit me and wreck these bumpers. Thank you.
Now I don't want to drive it anymore.
So I still drove it.
Yeah.
And so every now and then I'd need a part or something. I'd just go out there. I like to hang out with them, and Rod was there building race cars. And I'm like, this is cool, watching them restore them. And, mine had a little rust in the passenger floor. I said, hey, at some point, can you do my floors? They're like, yeah, a couple of years, we got a backlog. And I'm like, okay. And you come and racing with us? And I'm like, and I'd like that.
Selling me that Beetle?
The Beetle back there? They're like, nope, can't have it. And so
they weren't working on it though,
No.
right? You said they had parted it out and it was just sort of
sitting, waiting to be worked on,
waiting for you to finally get your
and
chance.
So for 2 years, I went back and forth, and I'd go out and they're like, "You coming racing?" And I'd be like, and they're like, "Nope." And I had finally
circular argument.
Yeah, so I'd finally given up, and the other thing. There was something I always wanted, which was a Vespa GS 150, the classic mod Who scooter. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, they're never going to sell me that Beetle. And I said, I'm just going to get the best GS 150 I can find. So there was a guy who had this rare Sears Allstate one down in Texas. And apparently Sears, together with Piaggio, did a one-time only 25 of these GS 150 Mark IVs that were labeled with an Allstate badge on it. And this guy had one of them. And there were maybe, at this point in time around 2000, 2001, there were like 10 of them left in the world. And I'm like, that's a pretty cool GS. And it was perfect. And my wife was like, you can't buy any projects. You got to, you're getting a perfect one, or you're not getting it, because I don't want any projects around this house. And I'm like, okay, well, that's a good license to get, spend some money on the best one I can get, because they ain't cheap.
You told me I had to get something nice.
And so she's like, all right. So I sold a couple electric guitars and stuff I had to get the money. So I had like $7,000. And my brother-in-law lives near Fort Worth, and that's where this was. And I called him. I said, hey, if I fly down, can you take me to go see the scooter? And then if it's good, can you take me to Forward Air, and we'll put it on a pallet and send it to Oregon? He's like, yeah, sure, no worries. So that next day, I was going to call the airline and make my travel plans. Well, that night, the phone rang, and it was Rod. And he was like,
want to go racing?
Hey, my dad and I were looking around here, and he's got a lot of projects I don't think he's ever going to get to. And he's like, that Bug is one of them. And he's like, there's a line of people 10 deep who want it. But we don't just build cars and sell them. Like, we pick the owners. And they're like, my dad and I have decided you should have that car. You've got 48 hours to decide. I said, I'll be out in the morning with the cash, because it was $7,000. So
I already decided when you called. Yeah.
Conveniently sitting right here in this pocket.
Yeah, exactly.
The exact
funny story
in cash.
Yeah.
And so I told my wife, I said, I'm not getting the scooter. I'm going to get the racing Beetle. And she's like, I know how bad you want it. Go get it. So I went out there and I paid them, and they made me pretty much verbally agree. You have to turn this into a vintage race car, race it with us here in the Northwest, keep the same level of maniacal documentation that the car had going in its period, because Bill had 2 3-ring binders of every race that car was in. Every penny he spent in receipts, from the cash check he bought the car with till the last fluids in the can that he bought to drain the fluids into the day he stored it. I mean, it was madness level documentation on this car. And I said, yeah. I said, you guys are picking the right guy. You don't understand. Like, I'm OCD like that. And so I bought it, and then Rod spent like the next 6 months helping me put it back together nights and weekends and get it racing. And then I had to go get my license and classes for racing and all that. And out of it came the second life of the Beetle. And, because of the maniacal level of documentation that Bill did, people were like, oh, you're just racing a Beetle. And Gary was like, when you come out with this car, it's going to piss people off. And he's like, they're going to be there with their Ferraris and factory race cars. And they're like, what's this old bug do? Why are you racing this old Beetle,
Straight up Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo. I'm just saying. I've heard
this. Oh, yeah. But he's like, but then you're going to lay out the documentation. And he's like, and they're going to shut the fuck up. I said, well, if it's going to piss people off, I said,
I'm in.
That's the car for me. And so we got it out. And I started racing it again and racing it a lot. And so it became very popular up in the Northwest. And then when it came to like the big leagues of going to Monterey with this thing, I'm like, I'm going to submit it to Monterey. And I sent it in, and they were like, oh my God, we'd love to have this car. Part of it for the freak show factor of like,
yeah,
people are going to be like, I think I just saw a Beetle out there. I think I'm drunk,
Oh, you're talking the historic races at Laguna, right?
The big one.
Yeah.
And so
that's awesome.
2011, it got accepted, and I raced it at Monterey, and people would come through the pits, and they'd be like, is this some kind of joke? I'm like, it's no joke, man. This is the real thing. And so I got out there and I raced it there, and it was pretty spectacular. I mean, even Leno was up talking about it, It was pretty cool. And ever since, back racing throughout the Northwest again, and we've developed the car to be a little bit faster than it was ever meant to be, and it's got a lot of Emery Outlaw tricks done with it. And so it's gotten to be a pretty famous car. Greenlight diecast, made a diecast of it. It's part of this Volkswagen racing set. And then I find out later, the guys from Heavy Metal Affliction, they're affiliated through Microsoft for the Forza game. The guy came and saw it and was like in disbelief, like this is Beetle racing, and so unbeknownst to me, they built it in Forza. So you can race my car in Forza.
That's so
cool.
Yeah,
I mean, they did a good job. It looks just like it. I didn't even know it. One of my friends, who's one of my Porsche buddies, was like, hey, look, my 8-year-old's racing your car in Forza. I'm like, what? Where did you get it?
And he ran it into a wall.
It's part of the game. I'm like, wow, that's nuts.
Are you? So how often are you still racing the car?
I mean, depending on work, 3 to 5 race weekends a year. I try to.
That's pretty good.
I've been trying to do more fun weirdo destination ones. Pudding Bay in Ohio. I went and raced at that race, which is really cool. It's on an island in Lake Erie, and you have to take your entire rig over on a ferry to this island, and you race during the week, and you race on an airport, like old school with hay bales and everything. It's a pretty spectacular event.
Cool.
They were the first ever, like
That's cool.
Bizarro World. They put an ad in the vintage racing magazines, like, we're looking for Beetles. And I'm like, nobody is ever looking for Beetles. I got to go to this.
Not for racing. A lot of people looking for Beetles, but they're all just, classics at this point. It's funny. I'm only in our early 40s, but man, Beetles were throwaways when we were kids, and now everybody wants one. Like, they're the hot thing to have as a vintage Volkswagen.
Well, that's what's so miraculous about this car is the fact that Bill put it away like a time capsule. Other people who had road raced them, they banged the crap out of them and they disposed them, or they, dune buggies were hot, so they cut them up and made them into a Manx or something else, and they're gone. This car just was a time capsule. I mean, it's amazing that it survived. And cool. So, and Emery's picked the right person to be the caretaker of it, because I keep the same level of documentation. I go race it wherever and whenever I can. I just went. The bummer is they invited me down for an under 2-liter Trans Am to Laguna Seca a couple weeks ago, but I put a new motor in and it wasn't dialed in right, and it sucked. And so
you got to learn. Right?
Yeah,
I mean that's the whole process of it. Figuring
that was an expensive weekend for nothing.
Yes.
But they're having another one later in the year in October, this Velocity Challenge, and it's kind of a big deal again, with the Trans Am group, so I'm going to go down for that again, I think. I just sent in my entry for it, and I should have my other motor dialed for that.
Absolutely awesome. Well, we're running to the end of time here, but I really appreciate it. I apologize for the delays, but I mean, the story you have woven today is incredible, and where you've come from, and the things that have affected our lives that we didn't even know before we met you. As far as having some of those shoes in my closet today,
right? Yeah.
So that's the thing. I asked Ye one day, like, why me? Why did you call me? And he was like, bro, you designed all the shoes I wanted as a kid. And he's like, who wouldn't want that guy designing for him? I said, good point. Thank you.
Thank you. That's the important thing. Yeah. Well, that's absolutely incredible. I want to thank you for doing this, taking time. And because I know you're busy, obviously.
And not feeling well. So I know you're recovering. So thank you again for that as well.
I want to thank Avance. It's been a great thing. Adam and the crew have done a great job building this hub of car culture. It's pretty amazing. We need more of it.
Well, clearly we agree.
There's more coming. Believe me, there's a lot more coming. So
listeners, viewers, if you want to go see more of Steven's stuff, you can check him out on Steven Smith on Instagram. Just all one word, Steven Smith, and it's the little blue check mark because it is official. Steven, any other places they should go check stuff out?
I think if you just looked up Steven Smith sneakers, you'd find a lot.
That's understandable.
Sometimes you'll find good pictures of the bug there. If you look up Steven Smith Racing VW, you never know what you'll get, but hopefully it'll be me. Rod.
Yeah, we'll post some links to your stuff that we find, and we'll get some pictures from you to share for our episode. I do want your vintage picture.
That's a good one. That's the one we actually put on the Avance Portland T-shirt design.
Yeah, nice.
With my 356.
Very cool.
I kind of photoshopped it all together and built this rather fun one.
Excellent. Well, for this episode of the Avance Podcast, as always, I'm Nick.
I'm Dan, and don't just get there. Enjoy the drive.